In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where
This is a
star-spanning
moment we'll
empires
never
rise
forget.
and fall like waves on a cosmic shore, there exists a truth that few dare to speak. Humanity is not what it seems. Behind the facade of primitive ape descendants struggling to reach the stars lies a secret so profound that it could reshape the balance of power across 1,000 worlds. Queen Zalara of the Zinthri Empire believed she had found the perfect political marriage, a harmless human male from an insignificant backwater planet called Earth. What she didn't know was that she had just married the most dangerous being in the known universe. And her new husband had been hiding in plain sight for reasons that would soon become terrifyingly clear. This is the story of how one ordinary human changed the fate of an entire galactic civilization, and why the universe would never be the same again. The grand throne room of the Zinthri royal palace stretched for nearly a kilometer, its crystalline walls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that had welcomed dignitaries from across the galaxy for over 3 millennia. Today, however, the ancient hall buzzed with an energy unlike any witnessed in recent memory. Representatives from 14 different star systems had gathered to witness what many considered the most unusual royal wedding in galactic history. Queen Zalara stood at the center of the ceremonial platform, her 7-foot frame draped in traditional Zinthri ceremonial robes that seemed to flow like liquid starlight. Her chitinous skin held the deep blue-black coloration that marked her as royalty among her people, and the 4 arms that extended from her elegant torso moved in the ritual gestures that had bound Zinthri rulers to their chosen mates for generations. Her compound eyes, each the size of a human fist, reflected the light of the ceremony in thousands of tiny fragments, creating an almost hypnotic effect. Beside her stood Marcus Chun, looking remarkably ordinary in comparison to the alien nobility surrounding him. At 5 feet 10 inches tall, with standard human features and simple brown hair, he appeared almost insignificant next to his towering bride. The ceremonial clothes that had been tailored for him looked expensive, but couldn't hide the fact that he seemed completely out of place among the gathered alien aristocracy. Several of the wedding guests whispered among themselves, wondering how this unremarkable human had managed to capture the attention of the most powerful ruler in this sector of the galaxy. Ambassador Korthak of the Vexillian Trade Federation leaned toward his aide, his serpentine form coiled elegantly in the ornate chair that had been provided for his delegation. His forked tongue flicked out briefly before he spoke in the whispered tones that his species used for private communication. Tell me again why our queen has chosen to bind herself to this particular human specimen. Surely there were more suitable candidates among the species that have proven their worth in the galactic community. The aide, a younger Zinthri with a green-tinged chitin that marked him as a member of the diplomatic caste, consulted his data pad discreetly. According to the official records, the human Marcus Chun represents Earth's interests in agricultural trade negotiations. His planet shows promise in food production techniques that could benefit our growing population. The marriage alliance secures favorable terms for both parties while strengthening our position in the Outer Rim territories. Agricultural trade, Korthak repeated with what might have been amusement if his species had been capable of such expressions. Our mighty queen, ruler of 47 star systems, controller of the largest military fleet in this quadrant of the galaxy, has married herself to a farmer. He settled back in his chair with a sound that might have been a sigh, though I suppose stranger political alliances have been forged for less practical reasons. The truth, however, was far more complex than the official story suggested. 3 months earlier, Marcus had arrived on Zinther Prime as part of a small human diplomatic mission. Earth had only recently achieved faster-than-light travel, and their first contact with the Zinthri Empire had been through what both sides had carefully termed a cultural exchange program. The humans were eager to establish trading relationships and learn from more advanced civilizations, while the Zinthri saw an opportunity to expand their influence into a previously unexplored region of space. Queen Zalara had initially paid little attention to the human delegation. Her focus had been on the ongoing territorial disputes with the hegemony of Kretar, a militant alliance of species that had been encroaching on Zinthri space for the better part of a decade. The humans seemed harmless enough, their technology was primitive by galactic standards, and their requests for agricultural assistance and basic technological exchanges posed no threat to Zinthri interests. She had assigned the matter to her diplomatic staff and expected the entire affair to be concluded within a few standard weeks. Everything changed during what should have been a routine diplomatic reception in the palace's eastern wing. The evening had been progressing normally when alarms suddenly began echoing throughout the complex. A Kretar assassination squad had somehow penetrated the palace's legendary security systems and was making their way toward the throne room where the reception was being held. The attackers were members of the Shadowfang clan, elite warriors whose stealth technology and combat prowess had made them feared throughout the galaxy. Palace security had responded immediately, but the Shadowfang warriors were living up to their reputation. Their personal shielding absorbed energy weapons fire, while their monomolecular blades cut through traditional armor like it was made of paper. Within minutes, they had carved a path of destruction through 3 levels of the palace, and were approaching the diplomatic reception where dozens of high-ranking officials from multiple species were trapped with nowhere to run. Queen Zalara had been coordinating the defense when she noticed that the human delegation was not among those who had been evacuated to the secure chambers deeper in the palace. According to the security reports, they had last been seen in the Eastern Gallery, directly in the path that the Shadowfang attackers were taking. She had immediately dispatched her personal guard to rescue them, but the communication channels were reporting that the attack had reached that section of the palace. What happened next had been pieced together from security recordings and witness testimony, though much of it seemed too incredible to believe. The recordings showed Marcus Chun walking calmly through corridors filled with emergency lighting and the bodies of palace guards, seemingly unaffected by the chaos around him. When he encountered the first of the Shadowfang warriors, something extraordinary occurred. The Kretar warrior, whose species evolved from predators that had dominated their homeworld for millions of years, had lunged at Marcus with a monomolecular blade that could cut through virtually any known material. The attack should have been fatal, but instead of dying, Marcus had simply stepped to the side with inhuman speed and precision. His hand had moved in a gesture too fast for the security cameras to capture clearly, and the Shadowfang warrior had simply collapsed. The remaining security footage showed Marcus moving through the palace like a force of nature. Each Shadowfang warrior he encountered fell without any visible cause, their bodies shutting down as if their nervous systems had simply stopped functioning. There was no violence in the traditional sense, no weapons being fired or blades being drawn. The humans simply moved through the attackers like they weren't there, and they ceased to be a threat. Within 10 minutes, the entire Shadowfang assassination squad had been neutralized. The warriors who survived long enough to be interrogated could only speak of a presence that seemed to exist on a level beyond their understanding. They described feeling their minds being invaded, their motor functions shutting down, and their consciousness being gently but irresistibly suppressed. The medical examinations revealed no physical injuries, but the psychological trauma was so severe that most of them had to be placed in induced comas to prevent complete mental breakdown. Queen Zalara had found Marcus in the Eastern Gallery, calmly tending to a wounded palace guard while the unconscious forms of 6 Shadowfang warriors lay arranged in a neat circle around him. He had looked up at her approach and smiled with the same mild, unremarkable expression he had worn during their brief diplomatic meetings. When she asked him what had happened, he had simply explained that he had been trying to find his way back to the reception when he encountered some individuals who seemed to be lost and confused. He had helped them find a comfortable place to rest and had been waiting for security to arrive so they could be properly assisted. The implications had been staggering. The Shadowfang clan represented some of the most dangerous warriors in the galaxy, beings whose combat training began before they could walk, and whose technology was centuries ahead of anything humanity was supposed to possess. Yet this seemingly ordinary human had dealt with them as easily as someone might deal with misbehaving children. Either the official reports about human capabilities were completely wrong, or Marcus Chun was something far more than he appeared to be. In the weeks that followed, Queen Zalara had made discreet inquiries about the human delegation, particularly about Marcus himself. The information she received had been frustratingly ordinary. According to all available records, he was exactly what he claimed to be, a mid-level agricultural specialist from the North American region of Earth, with expertise in sustainable farming techniques and crop rotation strategies. His background check revealed nothing more unusual than a degree from an institution called the University of California and several years of experience working for various agricultural cooperatives. Yet the queen found herself increasingly drawn to conversations with him. Unlike the diplomats and nobles who surrounded her daily, Marcus spoke with a directness that was both refreshing and somehow unsettling. He asked questions that revealed a depth of understanding about galactic politics that seemed inconsistent with his supposed background, and he offered observations about Zenthri culture that demonstrated insights that should have taken years of study to acquire. More intriguingly, Marcus seemed to possess an unusual ability to anticipate problems before they became serious. During trade negotiations, he would suggest minor modifications to proposed agreements that prevented complications that even experienced Zenthri diplomats hadn't foreseen. When technical difficulties arose with the agricultural equipment being demonstrated, he would identify solutions that hadn't occurred to the engineers who had designed the systems. The decision to propose marriage had come to her gradually, though she later realized it felt more like remembering something she had already decided long ago, rather than making a new choice. The political advantages were obvious. A marriage alliance with humanity would give the Zenthri Empire a foothold in a region of space that was rich in resources and strategically positioned between several major trade routes. The fact that humans appeared to pose no military threat made the arrangement even more attractive. But if Queen Zalara was being honest with herself, there were other factors involved. Something about Marcus intrigued her on a level that went beyond political calculation. He possessed a quality that she couldn't quite define, a sense of depth and hidden knowledge that suggested there was far more to him than what appeared on the surface. When she looked into his eyes, she sometimes had the unsettling feeling that she was staring into something vast and ancient, something that was looking back at her with an intelligence that spanned distances she couldn't begin to comprehend. The formal proposal had been made through proper diplomatic channels, with the Earth delegation expressing surprise and gratitude at the unexpected honor. Marcus himself had accepted with the same calm demeanor he displayed in all things, though the queen noticed that he didn't seem particularly surprised by the offer. If anything, his reaction suggested that he had been expecting something of the sort, though she couldn't imagine how he could have anticipated such an unprecedented development. Now, as the ceremony reached its conclusion, Queen Zalara found herself wondering what kind of future she was creating for herself and for the Zenthri Empire. The vows had been exchanged according to ancient traditions, the ceremonial bonds had been activated, and the political alliance was now sealed. According to every metric that mattered to galactic civilization, she had just married an ordinary human from a primitive world on the outer edge of known space. Yet as she looked into Marcus's eyes during the final blessing, she saw something flicker there for just a moment. It was a glimpse of something immense and patient, something that had been waiting for exactly this moment to arrive. The expression passed so quickly that she might have imagined it, but it left her with the distinct impression that she had not married a simple agricultural specialist at all. Marcus squeezed her hand gently as the ceremony concluded, and his smile was warm and genuine. "Thank you," he said quietly, his words barely audible over the cheering of the assembled guests, "for trusting me with this opportunity." It wasn't until much later that Queen Zalara would realize that his phrasing had been oddly specific. He hadn't thanked her for choosing him, or for honoring him with her hand in marriage. He had thanked her for trusting him with an opportunity, as if the wedding was not an end in itself, but rather the beginning of something much larger. Something that required trust in ways she was only beginning to understand. As the newlywed couple made their way through the receiving line, accepting congratulations from representatives of dozens of different species, none of the assembled dignitaries could have imagined that they had just witnessed the opening move in a game that would reshape the balance of power throughout the galaxy. The ordinary human who had just married their queen was indeed exactly what he appeared to be, but he was also something infinitely more complex and dangerous than any of them could have conceived. The wedding celebration continued long into the night, with feasts and entertainments that honor traditions from across the Zenthri Empire. But in the quiet moments between the formal activities, when Queen Zalara caught glimpses of her new husband interacting with their guests, she began to notice details that troubled her. The way other humans in the delegation deferred to him despite his supposedly modest position. The subtle changes in posture and demeanor that occurred among alien dignitaries when he entered their conversations. The fact that even the most arrogant and powerful individuals seemed to unconsciously seek his approval, as if they recognized some form of authority that they couldn't quite identify. By the time the last guest had departed and the palace had settled into the quiet rhythms of late night, Queen Zalara had reached a conclusion that both thrilled and terrified her. She had not married an ordinary human being. She had bound herself to something that was using the appearance of ordinariness as a form of camouflage. The question that would determine the fate of her empire was whether she had allied herself with humanity's greatest treasure or its most dangerous secret. As she and Marcus retired to the royal quarters that would now be their shared home, the queen found herself looking forward to discovering the answer. Whatever her new husband truly was, the adventure was only beginning. The first 3 weeks of married life proceeded with a normalcy that somehow made Queen Zalara more suspicious rather than less. Marcus adapted to life in the royal palace with an ease that seemed almost supernatural. He navigated the complex social hierarchies of the Zinthri court as if he had been born to it, remembered the names and preferences of hundreds of staff members after meeting them only once, and demonstrated an intuitive understanding of galactic etiquette that should have taken years to master. During the day, he fulfilled his official role as agricultural advisor with quiet competence that impressed even the most skeptical members of the Zinthri scientific community. His suggestions for improving crop yields in the arid regions of the outer colonies were innovative and practical, drawing on techniques that seemed to blend Earth farming traditions with advanced understanding of alien soil chemistry and atmospheric conditions. When pressed for details about how he had acquired such specialized knowledge, Marcus would smile and mention various agricultural journals and research papers he claimed to have read, though none of the Zinthri scientists had heard of the publications he referenced. It was during the evenings, however, that Queen Zalara began to notice the subtle inconsistencies that suggested her husband was far more than he appeared. Their private conversations revealed a depth of knowledge about galactic history that went well beyond anything that should have been available to a human from Earth. Marcus could discuss the economic implications of the Vorthan Crystal Wars as if he had lived through them, analyze the political structure of the Andromedan Council with the insight of someone who had spent decades studying their decision-making processes, and offer commentary on the cultural developments of species that humanity had supposedly never encountered. When she questioned him about these insights, Marcus would pause thoughtfully and then provide explanations that were technically plausible but felt somehow incomplete. He claimed to be naturally curious about galactic affairs and mentioned spending considerable time studying historical records and cultural databases that had been made available to the human delegation. His explanations were consistent and logical, but they failed to account for the casual familiarity with which he discussed events and personalities that even well-educated Zinthri nobles found obscure. The breakthrough came on a quiet evening when Queen Zalara decided to test her growing suspicions. She had dismissed the servants early and was sharing dinner with Marcus in their private chambers, discussing what appeared to be routine matters of imperial administration. The conversation had turned to the ongoing negotiations with the hegemony of Kretar, the same militant alliance whose Shadowfang assassins had attacked the palace during their first meeting. The Kretar have been unusually quiet since the assassination attempt, Queen Zalara observed, watching Marcus's reaction carefully. Our intelligence networks suggest they're regrouping for something significant, but we haven't been able to determine what they're planning. Marcus nodded thoughtfully as he considered her words, his expression showing the same mild interest he displayed when discussing agricultural techniques or palace maintenance schedules. The timing suggests they're waiting for something specific, he said after a moment. Probably the conclusion of their negotiations with the Zirian Syndicate. Once that alliance is secured, they'll have the resources to mount a more substantial offensive. Queen Zalara set down her eating utensil and stared at her husband. The negotiations between the Kretar hegemony and the Zirian Syndicate were among the most closely guarded secrets in galactic intelligence. The existence of the talks had been discovered only recently by Zinthri spies who had risked their lives to infiltrate Kretar diplomatic facilities. Even members of her own royal council weren't aware that the negotiations were taking place. Yet Marcus was discussing them as casually as if they were common knowledge. "How do you know about the Zirian negotiations?" she asked, keeping her voice carefully neutral. Marcus paused with his fork halfway to his mouth, and, for just a moment, Queen Zalara saw something flicker across his features. It was gone so quickly that she might have imagined it, but it looked like the expression of someone who had just realized they had made a significant mistake. When he spoke, however, his voice remained calm and measured. "I've been doing some reading about Kretar political patterns," he said, setting down his utensil and meeting her gaze directly. "Historical analysis suggests that they typically seek to secure their flanks before committing to major military campaigns. The Xerians are the most likely partners for that kind of arrangement, given their shared territorial interests and complementary resource bases." The explanation was logical and well-reasoned, but it didn't answer the fundamental question of how he had known that specific negotiations were actually taking place. Queen Zalara leaned back in her chair and studied the human she had married, seeing him with new eyes. The more she considered it, the more convinced she became that Marcus Chun was operating with access to information that shouldn't have been available to anyone outside the highest levels of galactic intelligence networks. "Marcus," she said slowly, "I think it's time you told me who you really are." Her husband was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving to the large window that offered a view of the capital city's skyline. The lights of millions of Zenthari citizens sparkled in the darkness below, and the orbital platforms that serve as docking facilities for interstellar traffic created moving patterns of illumination against the star-filled sky. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight and seriousness that she had never heard from him before. "That's a more complicated question than you might realize," Marcus said, turning back to face her. "The answer depends on which level of truth you're prepared to accept and how much you're willing to have your understanding of the universe fundamentally changed." Queen Zalara felt a chill run through her exoskeleton, but she forced herself to maintain steady eye contact. "Tell me everything." Marcus was silent for another long moment, as if weighing options that she couldn't see. Finally, he stood and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back in a posture that somehow seemed more natural for him than the casual demeanor he usually displayed. "The official story about humanity's first contact with galactic civilization is essentially accurate," he began, speaking toward the window rather than looking at her. "Earth did achieve faster-than-light travel recently, and we did seek out contact with more advanced species. What the official story doesn't mention is that this wasn't humanity's first encounter with a galactic community." He turned back toward her, and Queen Zalara was struck by how different he looked. The mild, pleasant expression that had characterized his features since their first meeting had been replaced by something far more intense and focused. His posture was straighter, his movements more precise, and his eyes held a depth and intelligence that made her earlier suspicions seem like pale shadows of the truth. "Humans have been aware of galactic civilization for approximately 200 years, Marcus continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone delivering a briefing rather than having a casual conversation. "We've been studying it, learning from it, and preparing for the day when we would be ready to take our place within it. The agricultural specialist, named Marcus Chun, does exist, and everything in his background file is accurate. But that identity serves as cover for something much more complex." Queen Zalara found herself leaning forward despite her efforts to maintain royal composure. "What kind of cover?" "I'm what my people call a deep integration specialist," Marcus said, and there was a formality in his tone that suggested he was using an official title. "My job is to establish humanity's initial relationships with advanced galactic powers while gathering intelligence about political, military, and technological developments that could affect Earth's future security. The agricultural expertise is real, but it's secondary to my primary mission." The implications hit Queen Zalara like a physical blow. "You're a spy." "Among other things, yes." Marcus's expression remained neutral, but she caught a flicker of something that might have been regret. "Though that term doesn't fully capture the scope of what I do. I'm also a diplomat, an analyst, a cultural interpreter, and, when necessary, a guardian." "A guardian," the Queen repeated, remembering the Shadow Fong assassins who had somehow been neutralized without any apparent cause. "What happened during the attack on the palace?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested he was revealing something that went to the core of who and what he was. Humans have certain capabilities that we prefer not to advertise to the galactic community. Our species developed along evolutionary lines that were quite different from most other sentient races, and those differences have resulted in abilities that could be problematic if they became widely known. What kind of abilities? Mental ones, primarily. Marcus returned to the table and sat down across from her, his posture now that of someone delivering classified intelligence rather than sharing a casual meal. Humans have neural structures that allow for forms of consciousness interaction that most species consider theoretical at best. We can influence thought patterns, suppress aggressive impulses, and, in extreme situations, temporarily disable hostile nervous systems. Queen Zalara stared at him, trying to process the implications of what he was telling her. You can control minds. Control is too strong a word, Marcus said carefully. Influence would be more accurate. We can encourage certain mental states while discouraging others, but we can't force anyone to act against their fundamental nature. What we can do is help aggressive individuals find their way to a calmer state of mind, which is what happened with the Shadowfang warriors. And you've been using these abilities during your time here, only in subtle ways, and only when absolutely necessary. Marcus met her gaze directly, and she saw genuine concern there. I've never influenced you, Zalara. Your thoughts and decisions have always been entirely your own. But I have occasionally helped to smooth over diplomatic difficulties and reduce tensions during negotiations. Nothing dramatic, just gentle encouragement toward more productive mental states. The revelation should have been terrifying, but Queen Zalara found herself oddly relieved. The inconsistencies and unusual insights that had puzzled her finally made sense, and the explanation provided context for behavior she had found intriguing but couldn't quite understand. More importantly, Marcus's assurance that he had never influenced her thoughts felt true in ways she couldn't rationally justify, but trusted nonetheless. Why are you telling me this now? She asked. Marcus's expression grew serious, and she saw something in his eyes that looked like anticipation mixed with concern. Because the situation is about to become more complex, and you deserve to understand what you've gotten yourself involved in. The marriage wasn't just a political alliance from humanity's perspective. It was a necessary step in preparing for developments that are already in motion. What developments? The Kretar negotiations with the Zirian Syndicate are going to conclude successfully, Marcus said, his tone taking on the quality of someone delivering a strategic briefing. Within the next few weeks, the hegemony is going to announce a major offensive against Zenthri territory. Their goal isn't just territorial expansion. They intend to break the power of the Zenthri Empire entirely and establish themselves as the dominant force in this region of the galaxy. Queen Zalara felt her breathing pattern change as the implications sank in. A successful Kretar offensive could mean the end of everything her people had built over millennia of civilization. How do you know this? Because humanity has been monitoring the situation for months, Marcus replied. Our intelligence networks are more extensive than most galactic powers realize, and we've been tracking Kretar activities as part of our preparation for full integration into galactic society. The attack on the palace during our diplomatic visit wasn't a coincidence. It was a probe designed to test Zenthri security systems and response capabilities. And you stopped it. I neutralized an immediate threat while gathering intelligence about Shadowfang combat capabilities and equipment, Marcus confirmed. The information we collected has been invaluable in understanding what the Zenthri Empire will be facing in the coming conflict. Queen Zalara was beginning to understand the true scope of what had been happening around her. The marriage proposal, you orchestrated it. I encouraged it, Marcus said carefully. I made myself available as an option and provided opportunities for you to recognize the potential advantages of an alliance with humanity. But the decision to propose was entirely yours, and your feelings about the relationship are completely genuine. The Queen considered this for a moment, searching her memories for signs of manipulation or unnatural influence. She found none. Her growing attraction to Marcus had felt organic and natural, based on qualities that she could identify and articulate. If he had influenced the process at all, it had been through being genuinely appealing rather than through any form of mental manipulation. What happens now? She asked. Marcus's expression grew more serious than she had ever seen it. Now we prepare for war. The Kretar offensive will begin within days. And when it does, the Zenthri Empire is going to need allies with capabilities that can match what the hegemony will be bringing to the conflict. Humanity is prepared to provide that assistance, but only if our partnership is strong enough to withstand what's coming. What kind of assistance? For the first time since the conversation began, Marcus smiled, and there was something in that expression that was both reassuring and slightly unsettling. The kind that will remind the galaxy why humanity managed to survive on a planet where almost everything was actively trying to kill us for millions of years. The Kretar think they understand warfare, but they've never faced an enemy that spent its entire evolutionary history learning to fight for survival against impossible odds. Queen Zalara looked at the human she had married and realized that she was seeing him clearly for the first time. The mild agricultural specialist had been a carefully constructed persona designed to hide capabilities and knowledge that could shift the balance of power throughout the galaxy. Marcus Chun was indeed exactly who his background claimed he was, but he was also a representative of a species that had been preparing for galactic integration with a patience and thoroughness that few other races could have managed. "Are there others like you?" she asked. "Deep integration specialists are embedded with most of the major galactic powers," Marcus confirmed. "We've been studying and preparing for years, waiting for the right moment to reveal humanity's true capabilities and take our place in galactic civilization. Your Empire's marriage alliance with Earth has moved that timeline forward significantly." The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't stumbled onto the galactic stage as primitive newcomers. They had been watching and learning from the shadows for decades, positioning themselves to emerge at exactly the moment when their capabilities would be most needed and most appreciated. The marriage alliance that Queen Zalara had thought she was arranging for political and economic advantage had actually been the opening move in a carefully orchestrated plan that could reshape the entire galaxy. "What do you need from me?" she asked, accepting that her role in this larger game was just beginning to unfold. Marcus reached across the table and took her hand, his touch gentle but confident. "Trust," he said simply. "When the fighting begins, you're going to see things that will challenge your understanding of what humans are capable of. You're going to learn things about my species that will seem impossible or frightening. I need you to remember that everything I've told you tonight is true, and that humanity's goals align with the best interests of the Zenthri Empire and galactic civilization as a whole." Queen Zalara squeezed his hand in return, feeling the strength and warmth there, and made her choice. "You have it." Marcus smiled again, and this time the expression was purely warm and genuine, free of the shadows and hidden depths that had characterized so many of his earlier reactions. "Thank you. I promise you won't regret it." As they sat together in the quiet of their private chambers, with the lights of the capital city sparkling beyond the windows and the stars of the galaxy wheeling overhead, Queen Zalara realized that her life had just taken a turn that would echo through history. She had married a human thinking she was securing advantageous trade relationships for her empire. Instead, she had allied herself with a species that might just save galactic civilization from a threat that was already moving against them. The only question now was whether the galaxy was ready for humanity to show what it could really do. The attack came exactly when Marcus had predicted it would, though the scale and coordination of the offensive exceeded even the most pessimistic projections of Zenthri military intelligence. The Kretar hegemony launched simultaneous strikes against 14 different star systems, deploying a fleet composition that suggested they had been preparing for this moment for years. What made the situation even more dire was the participation of Zirian Syndicate forces, whose advanced weapon systems and tactical support turned what might have been a manageable conflict into an existential threat to the Zenthri Empire. Queen Zalara stood in the central command center of the royal palace, watching as reports flooded in from across her territory. The holographic display showed red warning indicators spreading like a disease across the three-dimensional map of Zenthri space. Each flashing symbol represented worlds under attack, civilian populations being evacuated, or defensive positions being overwhelmed by the coordinated assault. Admiral Vorthak, the grizzled veteran who commanded the Zenthri defense fleet, gestured toward the tactical display with one of his forearms, while using another to manipulate the controls that provided detailed status reports. His chitinous features were set in grim lines as he delivered his assessment of the situation. "The outer rim colonies have been completely cut off," he reported, his voice carrying the weight of a military professional delivering catastrophic news. "The Kretar are using a pincer movement to isolate our defensive positions while the Zirians provide long-range fire support that's neutralizing our orbital platforms. Our casualty estimates suggest we've lost approximately 30% of our outer system defensive capability in the first wave alone." Queen Zalara felt the familiar tightness in her thorax that marked the onset of significant stress, but she forced herself to maintain the composure that her people expected from their ruler. "What about the core systems? Are they still secure?" "For now," Admiral Vorthak replied, though his tone suggested that the situation was temporary at best. "But the enemy is advancing along multiple vectors simultaneously. Our intelligence suggests they're planning to bypass our strongest defensive positions and strike directly at the capital system within the next 72 hours. If they succeed in breaking through our inner perimeter, we'll be facing a siege scenario with limited options for escape or reinforcement." The implications were clear. The Zenthri Empire, which had dominated this region of space for over 3 millennia, was facing the possibility of complete collapse within a matter of days. The carefully constructed alliances and defensive strategies that had protected their civilization for generations were proving inadequate against an enemy that had prepared for this conflict with unprecedented thoroughness and coordination. Marcus stood quietly at the edge of the command center, observing the proceedings with the same calm demeanor he had maintained throughout the crisis. Since the first attack reports had arrived, he had taken on an advisory role that somehow felt natural despite his lack of official military position. His insights about enemy tactics and strategic options had proven unerringly accurate, and Queen Zalara found herself increasingly relying on his counsel as the situation deteriorated. "What are your thoughts?" she asked, turning to address her husband directly. Marcus stepped forward to examine the tactical display more closely, his movements precise and confident in a way that suggested military training far beyond anything that should have been available to an agricultural specialist. As he studied the enemy positions and movement patterns, Queen Zalara noticed that his expression had taken on a quality of intense focus that transformed his features entirely. "The Kretar are following a standard siege protocol," he said after a moment, his voice carrying the tone of someone analyzing a complex but familiar problem. "They're attempting to isolate your strongholds while maintaining pressure along multiple fronts to prevent you from concentrating your forces effectively. The strategy is sound, but it has predictable weaknesses that can be exploited if you have the right resources available." Admiral Vorthak's compound eyes focused on Marcus with something that might have been skepticism. "What kind of resources?" Marcus turned away from the display to face the assembled military leadership, and Queen Zalara was struck by how different he looked. The mild agricultural advisor had been replaced by someone who carried himself with the confidence and authority of a seasoned military strategist. When he spoke, his words had the quality of a briefing delivered by someone accustomed to command responsibility. "Humanity is prepared to provide direct military assistance to the Zenthri Empire," he said, his tone formal and precise. "Our forces have been positioned to respond to exactly this kind of situation, and we have capabilities that can address the specific challenges you're currently facing." The command center fell silent as the implications of Marcus's words sank in. Queen Zalara felt a mixture of relief and apprehension as she realized that the moment her husband had been preparing her for had finally arrived. The time for secrets and careful revelations had passed. Humanity was about to show the galaxy what it was truly capable of. "What kind of capabilities?" Admiral Vorthak asked, his voice carrying a note of professional curiosity mixed with desperation. Marcus activated a personal communication device that Queen Zalara had never seen him use before. The device was clearly human technology, but its design suggested capabilities far beyond anything that Earth was supposed to possess. When he spoke into it, his words were in a language she didn't recognize, though the tone was clearly that of someone issuing operational commands to subordinates who were waiting for instructions. Within moments, the long-range sensors that monitored the space around Zenther Prime began detecting new contacts. The signatures were unlike anything in the Zenthri database, showing propulsion systems and energy readings that defied conventional understanding of faster-than-light technology. As the contacts resolved into individual vessels, it became clear that a significant fleet had somehow appeared at the edge of the star system without triggering any of the early warning networks that should have detected their approach. Impossible, Admiral Vorthak breathed, staring at the sensor readings in disbelief. Our detection grids monitor every possible approach vector. Nothing that large should have been able to reach the system without us knowing about it hours in advance. Marcus smiled, and for the first time since Queen Zalara had known him, the expression was entirely confident and slightly predatory. Human stealth technology operates on principles that most galactic civilizations haven't discovered yet. We've been perfecting it for decades while we observed and learned about galactic military capabilities. The approaching fleet consisted of ships unlike anything the assembled Zenthri officers had ever seen. The vessels were sleek and angular, with hull configurations that seemed to blend artistic elegance with aggressive functionality. More importantly, the energy signatures they were producing suggested power systems and defensive capabilities that were significantly more advanced than standard galactic technology. "How many ships?" Queen Zalara asked, though she was beginning to suspect that the question was less important than what those ships could actually do. "This is a relatively small task force," Marcus replied, his tone suggesting that this was indeed only a fraction of what humanity could deploy. 12 heavy cruisers, 48 destroyers, and support vessels. But human warships aren't designed according to the same principles that govern most galactic military thinking. Our approach to space combat reflects lessons learned from millions of years of evolutionary warfare on a planet where survival required constant innovation and adaptation. Admiral Vorthak was studying the tactical implications of the new arrivals, his expression shifting from skepticism to growing amazement. "The positioning is perfect," he said, grudging admiration creeping into his voice. "They're arrayed to provide maximum coverage of our defensive weak points while maintaining optimal firing solutions against the approaching enemy forces. This level of tactical coordination would normally require weeks of preparation and planning. Humans have been monitoring the situation for months," Marcus explained. "We've been tracking Cretar movements, analyzing their tactical preferences, and preparing countermeasures specifically designed to neutralize their advantages. Every ship in this task force has been equipped and positioned to address the specific threats that the hegemony is bringing to this conflict." The communication displays suddenly activated with an incoming transmission from the lead human vessel. The image that appeared showed a woman wearing a uniform that was clearly military in nature, though its design suggested an organizational structure and command philosophy quite different from what the Zenthri were accustomed to. Her features were stern and confident, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to commanding respect from dangerous situations. "Admiral Chun," she said, addressing Marcus with a formality that made Queen Zalara's assumptions about his background crumble even further. "Task Force 7 is in position and ready to commence operations. All vessels are at full combat readiness and awaiting your operational orders." Marcus straightened into a posture that was unmistakably military, and when he responded, his voice carried the crisp precision of someone who had held command authority for far longer than his apparent age would suggest. "Thank you, Captain Morrison. Execute pattern Delta deployment, and prepare to engage enemy advance elements as they enter the inner system. Coordinate with Admiral Vorthak's forces, and provide whatever support is necessary to protect civilian evacuation routes." "Understood, Admiral." Task Force 7 moving to combat positions. The transmission ended, leaving the Zenthri command center in stunned silence. Queen Zalara stared at her husband, seeing him with entirely new eyes as the full scope of his deception became clear. Marcus Chun, the agricultural specialist, had been a cover identity so thoroughly constructed that even she had been completely fooled. The real Marcus was apparently a high-ranking military officer in humanity's secret space fleet, with access to resources and capabilities that could change the balance of the entire conflict. "Admiral," she said, making the title question. Marcus turned to face her, and his expression combined genuine affection with professional determination. "Admiral Marcus Chun, commanding officer of humanity's Deep Space Operations Command. Agricultural Specialist is a cover identity that I've maintained for operational security purposes, but my primary responsibility is coordinating humanity's military response to threats against our allies and strategic interests. Admiral Vorthak stepped forward, his posture shifting to something that approached professional respect. Admiral Chun, your fleet's capabilities appear to exceed our intelligence estimates about human technology. How long has your species possessed this level of military advancement? Longer than most galactic powers realize, Marcus replied diplomatically. Humanity learned early in our development that survival required not just adapting to our environment, but actively working to stay ahead of potential threats. When we achieved faster-than-light travel, our first priority was understanding the galactic political situation and preparing for our eventual emergence as a significant power. The tactical display suddenly erupted with new activity as the Kretar advance fleet entered the outer edge of the Zenther system. The enemy force was massive, consisting of hundreds of vessels arranged in a wedge formation that was characteristic of hegemony assault tactics. Their approach was confident and aggressive, suggesting that they expected to overwhelm the Zenthari defenses through sheer numerical superiority and technological advantage. What they encountered instead was something that no Kretar strategist could have anticipated. The human task force moved with a precision and coordination that suggested their crews had been training for exactly this scenario for years. Their vessels accelerated to attack positions with a speed that defied conventional understanding of propulsion physics, while their weapon systems began targeting enemy ships with an accuracy that made it clear their sensors and targeting computers were operating on entirely different principles than standard galactic technology. The first exchange of fire revealed the true scope of the gap between human capabilities and what the Kretar had expected to face. The enemy's plasma cannons and missile systems, which had proven devastatingly effective against Zenthari defensive positions, seemed almost primitive when compared to the weapons that the human ships brought to bear. Energy beams that appeared to ignore conventional defensive shielding carved through enemy hulls like they were made of paper, while projectile weapons that moved at significant fractions of light speed simply erased their targets from existence. More importantly, the human vessels demonstrated tactical flexibility and adaptability that transformed the entire nature of the engagement. Instead of fighting according to the rigid formation protocols that characterized most galactic military thinking, they moved and attacked in patterns that seemed almost organic in their complexity and effectiveness. Individual ships would break away from the main formation to exploit specific tactical opportunities, coordinate with each other in ways that suggested near telepathic communication, and adapt their strategies in real time to counter whatever responses the enemy attempted. Within 20 minutes, the Kretar advance fleet had been reduced to scattered groups of damaged vessels attempting to withdraw to safer positions. The coordinated assault that had been planned to break through Zenthari defenses and establish siege positions around the capital had been turned into a rout that left the enemy command structure struggling to understand what had gone wrong with their carefully planned offensive. Queen Zalara watched the tactical display with growing amazement and a dawning understanding of just how dramatically the situation had changed. "How is this possible?" she asked, though she was beginning to suspect that the question was even more complex than it appeared. Marcus moved to stand beside her, his attention focused on the ongoing battle but his voice calm and reassuring. Humanity spent its entire evolutionary history learning to survive against impossible odds, he explained. When we finally reached the stars, we brought that experience with us. The Kretar are excellent warriors by galactic standards, but they've never faced an enemy that developed on a planet where everything was actively trying to kill them for millions of years. Admiral Vorthak was studying the battle reports with the expression of someone witnessing tactical possibilities he had never imagined. Your ships are operating independently while maintaining perfect coordination. How are they achieving that level of command and control integration? Marcus smiled, and there was genuine pride in his expression. Human neural architecture allows for forms of consciousness sharing that most species consider theoretical. Our ship crews aren't just following orders. They're thinking together as a collective intelligence while maintaining their individual initiative and creativity. It's an approach to warfare that requires capabilities that most galactic civilizations haven't developed. The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't just been hiding advanced technology. They had been concealing capabilities that represented an entirely different approach to space combat and military organization. The marriage alliance that Queen Zalara had thought would provide modest economic and political advantages had instead connected the Zenthri Empire to a species that possessed the power to reshape the galactic balance of power. As the human task force continued to systematically dismantle the Kreetar offensive, one thing became abundantly clear. The war that had seemed certain to destroy the Zenthri Empire had instead become the opening move in humanity's emergence as a major galactic power. And Queen Zalara found herself married to the man who was orchestrating that emergence with a patience and strategic brilliance that suggested humanity had been planning for this moment for far longer than anyone could have imagined. The only question now was what humanity intended to do with the power they were revealing, and whether the galaxy was prepared for the changes that were about to unfold. The battle for the Zenther system lasted only 6 hours, but the reverberations from humanity's intervention would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. What began as a desperate last stand by the Zenthri Empire against overwhelming odds had transformed into a complete rout of the most powerful military alliance in the known galaxy. The Kreetar hegemony, whose forces had never experienced a significant defeat in over 2 centuries of expansion, found themselves retreating in disarray while their carefully planned offensive collapsed around them. Queen Zalara stood on the observation deck of the royal palace, watching as the rescued survivors from the Outer Rim colonies were brought to safety by ships that moved with an elegance and efficiency that seemed to defy the laws of physics. The human vessels had completed their combat operations and were now demonstrating capabilities that were perhaps even more impressive than their military prowess. Medical ships that could treat injuries from dozens of different species, transport vessels that could evacuate entire planetary populations in a matter of hours, and support craft that were already beginning to repair damage to Zenthri infrastructure with technologies that seemed almost magical in their effectiveness. Marcus stood beside her, though his attention was divided between the ongoing humanitarian operations and a series of communication channels that connected him to human forces throughout the region. The small device he carried had revealed itself to be far more sophisticated than it had initially appeared, serving as a command nexus that allowed him to coordinate operations across multiple star systems simultaneously. The refugee ships from Colton 7 will be arriving within the hour, he reported, relaying information from one of his communication channels. Our medical teams are prepared to provide treatment for radiation exposure and chemical burns. The Kreetar used some particularly unpleasant weapons during their attack on the agricultural colonies. Queen Zalara nodded, though her mind was still struggling to process the full scope of what she had witnessed. The human fleet hadn't just defeated the Kreetar forces. They made the victory look effortless while simultaneously conducting rescue operations that demonstrated a level of humanitarian coordination that spoke to decades of preparation and planning. "How long have you been preparing for this?" she asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the stream of ships moving through the space around Zenther Prime. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested the question touched on subjects that went to the core of who humanity was as a species. "In one sense, we've been preparing for this our entire evolutionary history," he said. "Humans developed on a planet where survival required constant vigilance, rapid adaptation, and the ability to form cooperative alliances against threats that were beyond any individual's capability to handle. When we reached the stars and discovered the galactic community, those same instincts drove us to observe, learn, and prepare for the day when we would need to protect ourselves and our allies." He turned to face her more directly, and Queen Zalara saw something in his expression that suggested she was about to learn something that would change her understanding of humanity's place in the universe. "But in a more specific sense, we've been actively preparing for this conflict for almost 50 years, Marcus continued. Humanity's first contact with galactic civilization didn't happen when our official diplomatic mission arrived here. We've been monitoring galactic communications, studying political developments, and infiltrating key organizations since the early stages of our space program. The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't stumbled onto the galactic stage as primitive newcomers. They had been watching and learning from the shadows for decades, positioning themselves to emerge at exactly the moment when their intervention would be most needed and most appreciated. The marriage alliance, Queen Zalara said, the pieces beginning to come together. This was all planned. Not in the specific details, Marcus replied carefully. But humanity recognized that the Zinthari Empire represented the best hope for maintaining stability and peaceful development in this region of space. The Kretar hegemony's expansion threatened that stability, and their alliance with the Zirian Syndicate created a situation that could have resulted in the collapse of several peaceful civilizations. Admiral Vorthak's voice interrupted their conversation as he approached from the command center, his expression a mixture of professional respect and barely contained amazement. Admiral Chun, your fleet's performance exceeded every projection we could have made about human military capabilities. Our preliminary analysis suggests that your technology is at least 2 centuries ahead of what we had estimated based on your species' apparent development level. Marcus turned to address the Zinthari military leader, and Queen Zalara noticed that he had fully adopted the bearing and demeanor of a senior military officer. The agricultural specialist persona had been completely set aside, replaced by someone who clearly held significant authority within humanity's command structure. Human technology developed along somewhat different lines than what most galactic species consider standard, Marcus explained. We focused heavily on integration between biological systems and technological enhancement, which allowed us to achieve capabilities that might seem impossible by conventional standards. The coordination between your ships, Admiral Vorthak continued, his tone suggesting professional curiosity mixed with strategic concern. Our communication specialists couldn't identify any data transmissions between your vessels, yet they operated with perfect tactical synchronization. How is that possible? Marcus exchanged a glance with Queen Zalara before answering, and she realized that he was about to reveal something that represented the deepest secrets of human capability. Human neural architecture allows for forms of direct consciousness interface that most species consider theoretical, he said. Our ship crews weren't just communicating with each other during the battle. They were sharing aspects of their awareness and decision-making processes. Each vessel operated as both an independent unit and as part of a collective intelligence that could adapt and respond faster than conventional command structures allow. The implications of this revelation sent a chill through Queen Zalara's exoskeleton. Humanity possessed capabilities that went beyond advanced technology. They had access to forms of consciousness and mental integration that represented an entirely different approach to existence itself. Are all humans capable of this? Admiral Vorthak asked, though his tone suggested that he already suspected the answer would be disturbing. To some degree, yes, Marcus confirmed. The specific level of integration varies based on training and natural aptitude, but all humans possess the basic neural structures that make collective consciousness possible. It's one of the reasons why our species was able to survive and thrive on a planet that should have been too dangerous to support intelligent life. Queen Zalara found herself remembering the Shadowfang assassins who had somehow been neutralized during the attack on the palace. The warriors who attacked during the diplomatic reception, she said. You didn't just disable them physically. I temporarily suppressed their aggressive impulses while encouraging their minds toward a more peaceful state, Marcus explained. It's a capability that we prefer not to advertise, since most species find the idea of mental influence deeply unsettling. But it's also one of the reasons why humans have been able to study galactic civilization for so long without being detected. The communication device in Marcus's hand suddenly activated with an urgent transmission. The image that appeared showed Captain Morrison again, but this time her expression was grim and focused in a way that suggested significant developments. Admiral, we're receiving communications from Kretar Command Forces, she reported. They're requesting immediate negotiations under galactic warfare protocols. Apparently, the Hegemony's Leadership Council is prepared to discuss terms for ending hostilities. Marcus was quiet for a moment, and Queen Zalara could see him considering options and implications that she couldn't begin to understand. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone making decisions that would affect the future of multiple civilizations. Inform the Kretar that humanity is willing to participate in negotiations, but only under the condition that all hegemony forces withdraw to positions at least 5 light-years beyond Zinthri territorial boundaries, he said. Make it clear that any attempt to use the negotiations as cover for regrouping or reinforcement will result in immediate resumption of hostilities. Understood, Admiral. Should I also inform them that humanity will be acting as a formal ally of the Zinthri Empire in these negotiations? Marcus looked at Queen Zalara, and she saw a question in his expression that went beyond diplomatic protocol. She realized that he was asking not just for political authorization, but for personal confirmation that she was prepared to accept humanity as a full partner in whatever came next. Yes, she said, addressing both Marcus and the communication display. Inform the Kretar that the Zinthri Empire and humanity are allied in this conflict and will be negotiating as equal partners. Captain Morrison nodded with satisfaction. I'll relay those terms immediately. Based on the current tactical situation, I expect they'll be quite eager to accept whatever conditions we're willing to offer. The transmission ended, leaving Queen Zalara alone with Marcus and Admiral Vorthak on the observation deck. The immediate crisis had passed, but she was beginning to understand that the real changes were only beginning to unfold. Humanity had emerged onto the galactic stage not as supplicants seeking acceptance, but as a major power capable of reshaping the balance of forces that had dominated this region of space for millennia. What happens now? She asked, though she suspected that the question was even more complex than it appeared. Marcus turned back toward the view of the rescue operations continuing beyond the windows, his expression thoughtful and perhaps slightly concerned. Now we begin the process of integrating humanity into galactic civilization as a recognized major power, he said. The Kretar defeat will send ripples across the galaxy that will force every species to re-evaluate their assumptions about human capabilities and intentions. And those intentions are peace, stability, and prosperity for all species that are willing to coexist peacefully, Marcus replied without hesitation. Humanity has no interest in conquest or domination. We've seen what happens to civilizations that choose those paths, and we prefer cooperation and mutual benefit to the alternative. Admiral Vorthak stepped closer, his posture suggesting professional respect mixed with strategic curiosity. But you're prepared to use force when necessary to protect those goals. Marcus's expression grew serious, and Queen Zalara saw something in his eyes that reminded her that humans had evolved from predators who had spent millions of years learning to survive against impossible odds. Humanity learned long ago that peaceful intentions mean nothing without the capability to defend them, he said. We're not interested in starting wars, but we're very good at finishing them when they're forced upon us or our allies. As they stood together watching the ongoing operations that would restore order and security to the Zinthri Empire, Queen Zalara realized that her marriage had connected her not just to an individual, but to a species that possessed capabilities and knowledge that could transform the entire galaxy. The agricultural specialist she had thought she was marrying had been revealed as a high-ranking military officer in humanity's secret command structure. But even that revelation was only the beginning of understanding who and what humans really were. The most unsettling realization was that humanity's emergence as a galactic power had been inevitable from the moment they achieved faster-than-light travel. The only question had been when and how they would choose to reveal themselves. The marriage alliance with the Zinthri Empire had simply provided the opportunity and justification for that revelation to occur in a way that positioned humanity as protectors and allies rather than conquerors. As the first of the refugee ships began docking with the orbital platforms around Zinthra Prime, Queen Zalara found herself looking forward to discovering what other surprises her new allies might have in store for the galaxy. The war with the Kretar had ended almost before it had begun, but she suspected that the real adventure was only just getting started. 6 months after the defeat of the Kretar offensive, the Galactic Council convened for the first time in over a century with representatives from every major civilization in known space. The Grand Assembly Hall on the neutral world of Concordia had been designed to accommodate the most diverse collection of sentient species in the galaxy. But Even the architects who had planned the facility could never have anticipated the tension and anticipation that filled the chamber as delegates took their positions for what many considered the most important political gathering in galactic history. Queen Zalara occupied the traditional position designated for representatives of the Zenthari Empire, though her role in the proceedings had evolved far beyond what protocol would normally have required. As the formal ally and marriage partner of humanity's senior diplomatic representative, she found herself serving as a bridge between human interests and the concerns of established galactic civilization. It was a responsibility that would have seemed impossible to imagine when she had first proposed a simple trade alliance with what she had believed was a primitive agricultural world. Marcus sat in the section reserved for new participants in galactic politics, though his presence had already transformed the dynamics of the assembly in ways that would have been unthinkable just a year earlier. The delegates from dozens of different species watched him with expressions that ranged from curiosity to admiration to barely concealed apprehension. The agricultural specialist who had arrived as part of a modest human diplomatic mission had been revealed as Admiral Marcus Chun, commanding officer of military forces that had demonstrated capabilities beyond anything the galactic community had believed possible. The formal proceedings began with the traditional protocols that had governed council meetings for over 2 millennia, but the atmosphere in the chamber made it clear that this gathering would be anything but routine. The defeat of the Kretar hegemony had sent shockwaves through the established political order that were still reverberating across the galaxy, and the implications of humanity's intervention had forced every major power to reconsider their assumptions about military capabilities, diplomatic relationships, and the fundamental nature of power itself. Chancellor Vextera of the Andromedan Council rose to address the assembly, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's lighting in patterns that conveyed both formal dignity and underlying tension. As the senior representative of the galactic community's oldest continuous civilization, she carried the responsibility of addressing the questions that had brought the council together. We gather today to address developments that have fundamentally altered the balance of power throughout known space. She began, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones that marked formal Andromedan speech. The emergence of humanity as a significant galactic power, demonstrated through their intervention in the recent conflict, has created opportunities and challenges that require careful consideration by all members of this assembly. She turned to face the section where Marcus sat, and her expression conveyed a mixture of respect and diplomatic wariness that reflected the complex emotions that humanity's revelation had generated throughout the galactic community. Admiral Chun, your species' capabilities have clearly been understated in previous diplomatic exchanges. The Council requests that you provide a formal statement regarding humanity's intentions and objectives as you assume your place among the galaxy's major powers. Marcus rose with the calm confidence that had characterized all of his interactions since the truth about his identity had been revealed. He wore the formal dress uniform of humanity's Deep Space Command, and the insignia on his chest indicated a rank and authority that made several of the assembled delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. When he spoke, his voice carried across the chamber with the clarity and precision of someone accustomed to addressing large audiences on matters of critical importance. Honorable delegates, humanity comes to this assembly with respect for the traditions and wisdom that have guided galactic civilization for millennia. He began, his tone striking a balance between diplomatic courtesy and unmistakable strength. Our emergence as a major power was not intended to disrupt the stability that has been carefully maintained by the established political order. However, we could not remain passive observers when aggressive forces threatened the security and prosperity of peaceful civilizations. He paused to let his words sink in before continuing, and Queen Zalara noticed that his presence seemed to command attention in ways that went beyond simple diplomatic protocol. The assembled delegates were listening with an intensity that suggested they recognized they were witnessing a moment that would be remembered in the historical records of their respective civilizations. Humanity seeks partnership, not dominance, Marcus continued. We offer our capabilities in service of the principles that have allowed galactic civilization to flourish: peaceful coexistence, mutual prosperity, and the protection of those who cannot protect themselves. We have no territorial ambitions beyond the security of our homeworld and the safety of our allies. Representative Corvash of the Velian Trade Consortium, a species whose commercial networks spanned hundreds of star systems, leaned forward in his specially designed seating apparatus. His 6 arms gestured in the patterns that indicated serious concern about economic implications. Admiral Chun, your species' technological capabilities appear to exceed our previous understanding by significant margins, he said, his voice carrying the careful neutrality that characterized professional commercial negotiators. The galactic economy has been built around certain assumptions about resource distribution, manufacturing capacity, and transportation efficiency. How do you propose to integrate human capabilities without destabilizing the existing economic frameworks that support billions of sentient beings? Marcus smiled, and Queen Zalara recognized the expression that indicated he had been anticipating exactly this question. Humanity has been studying galactic economic systems for decades, he replied. We understand the importance of stability and gradual integration. Our goal is to enhance existing systems rather than replace them. We're prepared to share our technological advances through carefully managed programs that will benefit all participants while preserving the economic foundations that support galactic civilization. He activated a holographic display that showed detailed projections of economic integration models, trade enhancement proposals, and technological sharing agreements that demonstrated a level of preparation that should have taken years to develop. The assembled delegates studied the information with growing amazement as they realized that humanity had been planning for this moment with extraordinary thoroughness and attention to detail. As you can see, Marcus continued, we've developed integration strategies that will increase overall economic efficiency while providing new opportunities for existing commercial networks. Rather than disrupting current trade relationships, we propose to enhance them through improved transportation systems, more efficient manufacturing techniques, and expanded resource development programs. Chancellor Vexthera studied the holographic projections with the expression of someone recognizing capabilities that exceeded even her species' considerable analytical abilities. Admiral Chun, these proposals suggest that humanity has been monitoring and analyzing galactic economic systems for an extended period. When did your species actually achieve the capability for galactic-scale observation and intervention? The question hung in the air like a physical presence, and Queen Zalara could feel the tension in the chamber increase as the assembled delegates waited for an answer that would reveal the true scope of humanity's hidden development. Marcus was quiet for a moment, as if weighing exactly how much truth the galactic community was prepared to accept. When he spoke, his voice carried a gravity that made it clear he was revealing information that went to the core of humanity's nature and capabilities. Humanity achieved faster-than-light travel approximately 150 years ago, he said, and the chamber erupted in whispered conversations as the implications sank in. We have been studying galactic civilization for over a century, learning your languages, understanding your political systems, and preparing for the day when we would be ready to take our place among the stars. Representative Gorvok of the Kretar hegemony, whose species have been granted observer status in the negotiations following their defeat, rose to address the assembly. His warrior's bearing remained proud, despite the circumstances that had brought him to the council as a petitioner rather than a conqueror. Admiral Chun, your species demonstrated military capabilities that our strategists still cannot fully comprehend, he said, his voice carrying the grudging respect of a professional soldier acknowledging superior force. The hegemony has never been defeated so completely or so rapidly. We request clarification about the nature of human military doctrine and the extent of your species' combat capabilities. Marcus turned to face the Kretar representative, and Queen Zalara saw something flicker in his expression that reminded her that humans had evolved on a planet where survival required constant vigilance against threats that most galactic species couldn't imagine. The hegemony is an impressive military force by galactic standards, Marcus replied, his tone carrying professional respect mixed with unmistakable confidence. However, humanity developed on a planet where virtually every life form was actively hostile to our survival. We spent millions of years learning to defend ourselves against predators, environmental hazards, and resource competition that made survival in constant struggle against impossible odds. He activated another holographic display, This one showing comparative evolutionary development patterns that illustrated the fundamental differences between human development and that of other galactic species. Most intelligent species evolved on worlds where cooperation and peaceful coexistence were possible survival strategies, Marcus explained. Humanity evolved in an environment where violence, adaptation, and constant vigilance were prerequisites for existence. When we reached the stars, we brought those capabilities with us. The implications were staggering, and Queen Zalara could see understanding dawn across the faces of delegates representing dozens of different species. Humanity hadn't simply developed advanced technology. They had evolved capabilities that were fundamentally different from anything else in the galaxy. More importantly, Marcus continued, human neural architecture allows for forms of collective consciousness and coordinated thinking that most species consider theoretical. Our military forces don't just follow orders. They share awareness and decision-making processes in ways that allow for tactical coordination that appears supernatural by conventional standards. Chancellor Vextera rose again, her crystalline form pulsing with patterns that indicated deep contemplation. Admiral Chun, your species possesses capabilities that could easily allow you to dominate galactic civilization through force. Why do you choose cooperation instead? Marcus smiled, and this time his expression was warm and genuinely reassuring. Because we've learned that survival is about more than just the ability to fight, he said. Humans understand that true security comes from building relationships with allies who share our values and our commitment to peaceful coexistence. We're not interested in ruling the galaxy. We're interested in being part of a galactic community that allows all species to thrive and develop according to their own nature and potential. Queen Zalara rose from her position in the Zenthri section, and the chamber fell silent as the assembled delegates recognized that she was about to address the assembly in her role as humanity's principal galactic ally. Honorable delegates, she began, I have had the privilege of observing human capabilities and intentions more closely than any other representative in this chamber. I can attest that their commitment to peaceful cooperation is genuine and that their military intervention in the recent conflict was motivated entirely by concern for the safety of peaceful civilizations. She gestured toward Marcus with obvious affection and respect. 6 months ago, I believed I was arranging a simple trade alliance with a primitive agricultural world. Today, I stand as the formal ally of a species that possesses the power to reshape galactic civilization, but chooses instead to protect and enhance it. The Zenthri Empire is proud to stand with humanity as we enter this new era of galactic cooperation and development. The formal voting that followed was largely ceremonial, since the question was not whether humanity would be accepted as a major galactic power, but rather how that integration would be managed. The capabilities that humans had demonstrated made their admission to the Galactic Council inevitable, but the manner of that admission would establish precedents that would influence galactic politics for generations to come. When the final votes were tallied, humanity had been granted not just membership in the Galactic Council, but recognition as a founding partner in what was being called the New Galactic Compact. The agreement established frameworks for technological sharing, economic integration, and mutual defense that would transform the nature of interstellar civilization itself. As the assembly concluded and delegates began making their way out of the chamber, Marcus approached Queen Zalara with the warm smile that had first attracted her attention during their early diplomatic meetings. Thank you, he said, taking her hand in the gesture of affection that had become natural between them despite their very different physiologies. For trusting me through all of this, and for being willing to stand with humanity as we take our place in galactic civilization. Queen Zalara squeezed his hand in return, looking into eyes that she now knew held the wisdom and patience of species that had been preparing for this moment for over a century. Thank you for showing me that the universe is far more interesting and full of possibilities than I ever imagined, she replied. I thought I was marrying an agricultural specialist, but I ended up with a husband who helped reshape the galaxy. Marcus laughed, and the sound carried genuine warmth and satisfaction. The agricultural expertise was real, he pointed out. I really do know quite a lot about sustainable farming techniques. That knowledge just happened to come with some additional capabilities that seemed relevant to our current situation. As they walked together through the corridors of the council facility, surrounded by delegates from dozens of different worlds who were already beginning to discuss the implications of the new galactic compact, Queen Zalara reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. She had begun with simple political calculations about trade relationships and alliance opportunities. Instead, she had discovered that the universe was full of species and capabilities that exceeded her wildest imagination, and that sometimes the most profound changes came disguised as ordinary diplomatic arrangements. The marriage that had started as a political convenience had become something far more significant. The foundation of an alliance between two species that would influence the development of galactic civilization for thousands of years to come. And at the center of it all was the recognition that sometimes the most dangerous and powerful individuals were